The National Desk, America's News, now.
A criminal investigation intensifying, taking aim at the former president.
I think it's pretty clear that Mr. Trump, has a significant problem here.
Donald Trump's legal team and the DOJ butting heads over what happened during the search at Mar-a-Lago.
He had a right to have all the documents that he took.
The new evidence coming to light as I go one-on-one with the former president's son-in-law and advisor, Jared Kushner. Were you aware that those documents were there at Mar-a-Lago? What's next in the legal standoff and why it could be months before any criminal charges are filed. Plus, recession risk rising.
I do think that we're going to go through a painful, volatile period here.
What experts say is driving higher prices and the Fed's next move in a delicate balancing act to avoid economic decline. And right now, a state of emergency in Mississippi. A water crisis cutting off supply to tens of thousands of people. What the city is doing to give residents some relief and how long it could take for the problem to be resolved. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Eugene Ramirez. On this weekend edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week and to look ahead at what to expect. We start with the four big stories we're following this week. The legal standoff between former President Trump and the Department of Justice. President Biden giving a primetime address in Pennsylvania, focusing on the ongoing battle for what he's calling the soul of the nation. A state of emergency right now in Jackson, Mississippi. Tens of thousands of people living without clean running water. And new numbers show the labor market could be tightening, fueling more fears about a recession. We start with the battle over classified documents found in former President Trump's Florida home, Mar-a-Lago. A federal judge hearing arguments this week from the Department of Justice and Trump's legal team over his request for a neutral attorney or special master to review the materials seized. The DOJ says that's not necessary because a taint team has already reviewed those materials. Well, the judge says she will issue her ruling in writing, has not given a time frame, though. Now, the Justice Department accuses former President Trump of moving secret documents around Mar-a-Lago in an effort to obstruct the investigation. The National Desk's chief political correspondent, Scott Thuman, has the details.
For the first time, a look at evidence that could indicate potentially criminal actions by former President Trump and or his team. Some of more than 100 documents clearly identified as sensitive and, if released, might compromise national security or human intelligence sources. Former federal prosecutor Glenn Ivey.
I think it's pretty clear that Mr. Trump, has a significant problem here, and there may be others around him that do as well. It's an ongoing investigation, and it sounds like it's, not near completion at this point. I think there's potential criminal exposure here for sure.
Pointing to the Justice Department's latest 36-page court filing, citing insistence by Trump's team, even after being subpoenaed, that all classified documents had already been turned over. And prosecutors say there were efforts to obstruct the government's investigation. Trump responding, terrible the way the FBI during the raid of Mar-a-Lago threw documents haphazardly all over the floor, perhaps pretending it was me that did it, and then started taking pictures of them for the public to see. Trump continues to argue are protected by executive privilege.
My father-in-law has said that he has declassified, or he did declassify as president, everything that he took from the Oval Office, that he had a right to have all the documents that he took.
Others call this a smoking gun and may not be the last.
The other issue, too, is that apparently there's someone with information inside his inner circle who's provided that to the Department of Justice, and more could be coming as the investigation moves forward.
And that could have both short and long-term political ramifications. In Washington, Scott Thuman for the National Desk.
On Thursday night, President Biden delivering a primetime address from Independence Hall in Philadelphia. The president zeroed in on what he calls an extreme threat to our democracy.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. They promote authoritarian leaders and they fan the flames of political violence.
Now, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy offering his own response to the speech, saying the president has launched an assault on democracy, questioning whether people have benefited from any of his policy decisions in the last 19 months. Now, this was one of several stops the president made in the key swing state of Pennsylvania this week. On Tuesday, during a visit to Wilkes-Barre, President Biden laying out his Safer America plan to address rising crime. Now, $37 billion plan includes $13 billion to hire and train 100,000 police officers, $3 billion to clear court backlogs of murders and gun crime cases, and $15 billion in grants to support violence prevention and mental health intervention programs. Wisconsin is the next stop on the campaign trail for President Biden. He'll make his way there on Monday. We're now just about 2 months out from the midterm elections. The outlook for Democrats this November starting to look better, according to a new Wall Street Journal poll. Democrats have a slight advantage over Republican candidates in the midterms, 47% to 44%. Back in March, Republicans had the edge over Democrats in that same poll, 46% to 41%. This week, a state of emergency unfolding in Jackson, Mississippi. On Monday, the city's water system started to fail after near-record river flooding, and the backup pumps just can't keep up. Take a look at this photo here. This, what you see there in that tub, is what people are having to face coming out of the pipes in their homes. People are being told not to use any tap water before it's been treated. There's still not enough water pressure for toilets to flush even. An emergency rental pump capable of pumping an additional 4 million gallons of water has now been installed, and it should increase water pressure some, but it's going to take some time. U.S. employers aren't ditching their help wanted signs just yet. New data released this week shows the number of open positions increased unexpectedly in July, with roughly 11.2 million jobs available. Now, the data points to a tight labor market, something the Federal Reserve is watching as it works to curb inflation. High job demand can exacerbate inflation as employers offer higher wages to attract workers. The National Desk's Ryan Smith reports.
Because of this job market, workers are expecting better benefits and more money. Get this, the number of people looking for jobs that pay at least $20 an hour shot up more than 35% year over year when compared to those looking at wages starting at $15 an hour. It's a tight market and job seekers remain in the driver's seat.
I come in, I put in the people, process, and technology to help them scale their organization.
Managing call centers and healthcare service outreach, Ed Hahn says it's about much more than just a bigger paycheck when it comes to job hopping these days.
And then people started realizing that work-life balance was more important. And because of that, they're now standing a little bit firmer behind what they want.
According to numbers just released this week by Indeed, more job searchers are looking for work that pays $20 an hour, far surpassing searches for jobs at $15 an hour. A sign of how inflation and labor shortages are pushing up wages.
Your unemployment level is so low that you have to pull people from their current roles, which means they're generally going to get a pay increase.
While the number of job openings ticked up in July, some major corporations are pulling back. Best Buy, Ford Motor, Walmart, and Wayfair all announcing layoffs in recent weeks.
Business owners love predictability. And that's the one thing you don't have right now.
In this uncertain economy, 50% of firms expect to slash staff in the months ahead. That according to a recent PricewaterhouseCoopers survey of more than 700 executives. But experts say those scalebacks are not yet impacting small businesses. So we know many businesses out there are still in desperate search for workers, and there are a few areas harder hit than in education. Right now, about 300,000 teacher and school staff openings across the country. And it couldn't really happen at a worse time as schools nationwide are heading back to school. So I'm here tonight with our fact check team to dig into the numbers on this. So Courtney, what did you find out when you took a deeper dive into the data here?
Ryan, a recent National Education Association poll found that over half of teachers said they'd leave the field earlier than planned, up from 37% last August. Now, the return to in-person learning, mask debates, gun violence, political arguments over what can and can't be taught, and disruptive students have all played a role here. In fact, according to the American Federation of Teachers, 70% of teachers say poor student discipline and a lack of support for dealing with disruptive students is a serious problem.
And when it comes to this specific sector of education, Janae, why are we seeing such a mass exodus out there?
Right, so there are a lot of factors at play here, like pay, stress, burnout. And according to a jobless survey, almost 30% of teachers said low pay and benefits influenced their decision to leave.
And Janae, tonight you also found out, though, this is interesting, that the shortages really depend on the location of where this is happening.
That's exactly right. So according to the New York Times, salary isn't the only thing that matters. So Florida's location and well-paying suburban schools usually attract more teacher candidates.
And what have you learned about what states are doing now to combat these shortages?
Right, so this is really interesting. So states like California, Missouri are relaxing their certification requirements by changing licensing criteria and lowering the passing score on tests or dropping them altogether. Now in Florida, veterans can get temporary teaching certificates while they finish their bachelor's degrees, and states like New Mexico, Alabama, and Mississippi are raising teacher salaries by thousands of dollars.
Deeper context behind these ongoing shortages right as schools are starting across the country. Courtney and Janae, thank you for that.
And coming up, fake football ticket scam. College students out hundreds of dollars. The warning from police about scammers taking advantage of those dedicated fans. Then guns at school. Weapons already found on students as the new school year gets underway. What parents want done to stop it. The National Desk team of reporters bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. From a warning about college football ticket scams in Ohio to an Alabama flutist getting a rare opportunity. We're taking the pulse of America. We start with guns found on the first day of school in Maryland.
Leaving Suitland High School with her father, this is what one student says about the presence of guns in her school.
It's scary and frightening, but you just deal with it.
You just deal with it, she says. Her father says it's time for metal detectors.
It's bad that they are, but they are very necessary, as we saw yesterday.
The first day of school, the day just getting started, when sheriff's deputies arrive with a warrant for a 16-year-old wanted for a June carjacking of a rideshare driver in District Heights. The student is found to be carrying a gun loaded with 30 rounds.
It did appear to have an extended magazine and a laser sight on it, but it was a Glock firearm.
That arrest led to information that another student may have a gun as well. He too is searched, and police say he too is carrying a fully loaded gun.
Our security personnel did an excellent job avoiding what could have been a tragic incident in the school system.
On the Ohio State University website, Brutus takes you through how to safely buy tickets and get to a Buckeye game.
I mean, I thought it was pretty safe. I didn't see any warning signs yet when I first logged on to it.
OSU student Olivia Litvin called OSU police to say she paid $100 for tickets through a social media ticket exchange.
I was like, that's interesting, but I'll go ahead and do it.
But after she Venmo'd her funds, she never got those tickets or heard from the seller again.
You need to go through authorized and reputable vendors. So that, outside of that, it's kind of buyer beware.
OSU police have now taken up to 3 scam reports for Buckeye football tickets within the last few weeks.
I was excited, but it turned out to be a hoax.
She spent over $300 on another online group for buying and selling tickets. The electronic evidence traced back to a prepaid phone, owner unknown.
Good for you for getting your $100, but I hope you end up in jail.
And at least what instrument do you play? And it's just like, oh, you must play the tuba. And it's like, nope, I don't play the tuba. I'm on the other side of the spectrum.
Meet Jayshawn Robinson. He's a flutist that also happens to be 6 foot 8 inches. Growing up, many asked him, why not use your height for sports?
It wasn't fun to me.
Music was always Robinson's first love, first starting out on the recorder in elementary school, saxophone in middle school, and flute in high school. And now he's been given the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to study in Norway at the Norwegian Academy of Music, Oslo Conservatory.
And I got the email that I was accepted into this international music course. I was like, no, that's not true.
He worked hard to master his instrument since his freshman year at Davidson.
That passion, that energy was evident from the first time I saw him. The football coaches wanted to fight me for him.
Beatty's words of wisdom as Robinson begins his new journey: don't forget it.
If I forget about Davidson, I forget about part of me.
Good for him. All right, still to come, the Mar-a-Lago investigation. My one-on-one with former President Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, weighing in on the FBI's search for secret documents. Don't miss it after this break. This week, son-in-law and former senior advisor to President Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, who wrote in his new book, Breaking History, a White House memoir about his history of thyroid cancer, confirmed to me that just last week he had a second thyroid surgery. It's just one of the many topics we discussed in a wide-ranging interview.
We had the surgery last week. It was very successful. That's why I'm maybe a little bit higher up than I normally would be. So, but good to be with you.
Great, and we wish you much health. In another recent development that we're following, former President Trump posting and sharing dozens of messages on social media, many linked to QAnon conspiracies. Hours later, we see that DOJ filing alleging classified documents were likely concealed or removed in an attempt to obstruct the FBI's investigation. You were a senior advisor to the former president. Are you advising him now, and if not, who is?
So I have not been involved with the recent situation, but one of the reasons I wrote my book was for really people to understand what it was like to be through all of the initial allegations that they made against President Trump. I write about how he was accused of colluding with Russia to overdo an election in 2016, which was a crazy one, and how we spent 2 years navigating through that, what it was like to be falsely accused, how they would leak certain things to different people in the media, put out these allegations that would make massive headlines, and then a couple of weeks later, they would be gone and disproven. And the same thing happened, I write about in the impeachment, where President Trump was trying to investigate corruption in Ukraine, which turned out actually to be true, but they impeached him for that. So I think what you're seeing now is there's been a big foot of politicization in these areas where they try to get him with all these inquiries. But I think that they're trying to do that to distract from all of the great accomplishments that he had. And I write about how he accomplished all those things.
What do you make of the FBI's handling of all this? Do you still believe in that deep state rhetoric that your father-in-law oftentimes shares on social media?
So I believe that there is a ton of amazing agents in the FBI and law enforcement who I worked with, in counterterrorism and other areas, who do a tremendous job. But I do think it was pretty well established that the FBI did some pretty nefarious things to entrap Michael Flynn or to falsify affidavits in order to spy on President Trump's campaign. So there definitely were some rotten apples then, and it appears that there may be some political bias now. But I think that now they're basically fighting over paperwork that hopefully could have been resolved between lawyers. And all that the raid has done is it's mobilized people who already had distrust in the FBI based on the previous 4 years to have more. And then it's elevated a lot of the information that they may be trying to keep quiet.
Speaking of that paperwork, you write in your book a lot about your foreign policy experience. You advise a former president on foreign policy. Some of these documents that have allegedly been recovered labeled no foreign, meaning that they can't be shown to foreign nationals. Were you aware that those documents were there at Mar-a-Lago?
So, like I said, everything we're dealing with right now is based on media reports. I'm not aware of what was or wasn't there.
Well, not just media reports, but we've seen also, of course, the DOJ filing, the affidavit. So it's not just the media reports. We've seen official documents in the process as well, alleging these things, right?
Yeah, like I said, again, I write in the book, too, about, criminal justice reform and the work that I did bring that on. I had an experience early in my life where you had a very politically ambitious prosecutor in Chris Christie who went after my father. They have endless resources. When you're the government, you have a lot more access to the media. And so when the government wants to fight you, they have a lot of tools at their disposal. And
let's dig a little deeper into that book. You talk about your relationship with the Saudis. You paint, some would say, a positive picture of the Saudi crown prince. In fact, you write about the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. This is a quote now. While this situation was terrible, I couldn't ignore the fact that the reforms that MBS was implementing were having a positive impact on millions of people in the kingdom, especially women. So I ask you now, how do you justify your relationship with MBS after Khashoggi's murder?
Right. So you're a journalist, so you have to ask that question. But if you look at kind of the significance of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, which has been there for 80 years, our relationship was always about economy and it was about national security. And during the time in Washington, we made a lot of improvements on national security. We focused on ways to combat extremism, to again, a lot of the issues, if you go back to 2016, we had ISIS had a caliphate the size of Ohio. They were beheading journalists. They were killing Christians. You had people who were being radicalized online. You had the Pulse nightclub shooting, the San Bernardino shooting. And then when President Trump went to the Middle East, he went to Saudi Arabia on his first trip, which was a very controversial trip. I take people inside the Situation Room and how all the conventional thinkers were saying that he shouldn't go ahead with this trip. But he basically got up there and said, this is all of our problem. The king got up there and said, there's no glory in death. And Saudi opened a counter-extremism center, which has been combating a lot of the misinformation online that was used to radicalize youth. We opened up a counter-terror finance center. Again, the media doesn't talk about these things, to stop funding to go to terrorist organizations, and has seen a dramatic increase in it. In that time, we got the Abraham Accords done, where Israel and the Arab countries are now starting to interact. There's flights, there's phone calls, there's businesses starting to happen between them. And that's leading to a much more peaceful area, which from America's point of view is phenomenal, because that means that we're going to send less of our sons and daughters over there to fight in wars. And it means that, hopefully the world will be less safe from the extremism that's been spread across the globe.
And a big part of your book talks about the Abraham Accords. Do you consider that to be your greatest achievement at the White House?
So I think it's something I'm very, very proud of. I think that it's something that many people thought couldn't be done. Again, the conventional wisdom in Washington is that you'll never have peace between the Israelis and the Arabs until you have peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I originally accepted that as dogma, but I write about my journey of speaking with all the leaders, speaking with all the people who have been involved, and finding a new truth. And then for 3 years, I was criticized every step along the way by all the media and all the people who worked beforehand, and how we got that breakthrough, which has led to an explosion of interaction in the region, which has been very positive. But I will say that for me, the area that I take the most personal gratification from is some of the pardons that we were able to do with people, where you take people who would be in prison for the rest of their lives, like an Alice Marie Johnson, and then you see that they've been reformed. But our criminal justice system, as I said earlier, is not a perfect system. And so these people have lifetime sentences, and now they're with their families and living a new life. And we did great work on criminal justice reform, which I write about. And for me, again, I get pictures every week of people who are being released from prison now with job skills training earlier than they would have otherwise. And I just take a lot of personal gratification in that. So that's just been something very close to my heart that very, very proud of, that continues to see good results.
And you do write about some troubles as well, specifically clashes that you had with Trump chief strategist Steve Bannon, who accused you of leaking unfavorable stories about yourself and others. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, you sealed off a door between your offices. What led to that, and what's that relationship like now, especially, and maybe you tip us off to something here, as you look ahead to possibly 2024 for your father-in-law?
Yeah, so I think that Steve was a great partner on the campaign. I write about how he got involved in the campaign for the last 2 months. He came in, he was very good at maneuvering with the media. He was good at that. But then we got to the White House, he became a very divisive figure.
Well, Kushner does talk about a possible return to the White House in 2024. You can watch the full interview on thenationaldesk.com. Up next, an unusually calm hurricane season. Just how rare of a trend that is as we approach peak season. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website now. In Mexico, a 3-year-old girl was declared dead at a hospital, later woke up at the funeral, but passed away again shortly after. In New York State, grocery stores putting up signs that say you have to be 21 years old to buy a can of whipped cream. However, a state law only bans people under 21 from buying whipped cream chargers. And former NFL star turned civil rights activist Colin Kaepernick and his longtime partner Nessa Deeb announced the birth of their first child. Those stories are more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. And now a look ahead at some of the top headlines we're watching in the week ahead. On Tuesday, voters in Massachusetts will vote in primary elections. One of the key races to watch there will be the Republican bid for governor, which current Governor Charlie Baker is now on his way out. Thursday, the NFL season kicks off. Defending Super Bowl 56 champs, the LA Rams, will be hosting the Buffalo Bills. And late in the week, hurricane season reaching its peak. It's been an unusually slow season so far. Tropical Storm Danielle, though, formed just this past Thursday after the first August in 25 years without a named storm. Recession fears realized. Coming up, what economists are saying now on when we could see a downturn and the new warning about housing prices. You're watching The National Desk, America's News Now. Watch us live weekdays 6 a.m. till 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We're back after this.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Eugene Ramirez. We start with the U.S. economy. Wall Street whiplash this week. Stocks closing down several days in a row. Analysts believe investors are still worried about inflation after the Fed chairman hinted at another sharp interest rate hike. Now, it won't be announced until September 21st, but fears it will go up another 0.75% appears to be looming in investors' minds. The rising interest rates are not only having an impact on Wall Street, but also on the housing market. Home prices continued to cool off in June, but were still much higher than a year ago. According to S&P Case Shiller, home prices in June were 18% higher than the same month last year. And that's a weaker pace than in May of this year, which showed a nearly 20% spike. Home prices, though, dropping the most in Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, Denver, and Portland. Now, economists warning prices will completely stall amid what the National Association of Realtors dubbed a housing recession. The National Desk's Ryan Smith explains.
More mixed economic messages this week, but one thing many economists agree with, the expectation of a recession in the next year.
Inflation is always caused by excess growth in the money supply, turning the printing presses on.
Economist Steve Hanke telling CNBC this week that trillions in federal pandemic relief is driving higher prices and will be responsible for what he calls, quote, a whopper of a recession in 2023.
Starting with COVID in February of 2020, we had an unprecedented growth in the money supply in the United States, and that is why we are having inflation now.
Almost 3/4 of business economists surveyed earlier this month say the U.S. will be in a recession by the middle of 2023. The U.S. is already in a housing recession, that according to the National Association of Realtors, and Goldman Sachs warning Tuesday that it expects home price growth to stall completely in 2023.
I do think that we're going to go through a painful, volatile period here.
Despite these warnings, consumer confidence ticking up this week and new employment data showing strength. Almost twice as many open jobs than there are workers. Normally good news, but instead causing worries for the Federal Reserve as it tries to lower inflation and avert a recession.
While higher interest rates, slower growth, and softer labor market conditions will bring down inflation, they will also bring some pain to households and businesses.
That pain also hitting Wall Street as key stock indexes continue to struggle, down double digits since the beginning of the year, adding another layer of turbulence to Americans' bottom lines. I'm Ryan Smith reporting.
Another issue fueling economic fears for some, President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. Bank of America, citing Department of Education data, says the president's proposal would wipe out debt for about a third of student loan borrowers who only have loans of $10,000 or less. Meantime, conservative economists warning that freeing up the money borrowers would otherwise be paying their lenders could cause inflation to climb if they spend that money on other goods. But the fact is they have that disposable income now, since student loan repayment has been on pause during the COVID pandemic. In fact, White House economists arguing once the pause is lifted in January, it will reduce buying power for other borrowers, offsetting the boost from the forgiven debt. Now, some college students who've paid off their loans don't think this is fair, and neither do some who want to go to college but just can't afford the current costs. Our Jan Jeff Coates spoke with Kate Herzel from the conservative organization Campus Reform.
So you graduated college a couple of months into the pandemic of May 2020. I read you had $28,000 in debt and you paid off most of your loans. Kate, how'd you do it? And what's your message to those who support this idea to pay off college loans?
Well, as you said, I graduated with $28,000 in student debt, and I knew that was my personal responsibility to repay it. In fact, I chose my college based on financial reasons, and I worked multiple jobs to make sure that I would graduate with minimal loans. As you said, I graduated in 2020, and so I didn't have the accruing interest rates and I didn't have the monthly payments that I needed to, or that I had for when I'm paying back my student loan debt.
Right.
And so I decided to start paying off my high interest loans as soon as possible. And I paid about $17,000, but when my friends and family heard this, they thought that I was crazy. They said that Biden might forgive some or all of my personal loans. And so I decided to stop. And that's the problem with Biden's policies. It's actually incentivizing recent college students to not repay their loans and instead rely on the taxpayers.
That's interesting. So you stopped because there was no more of that interest that was going to be accrued there. And so your family's saying, why are you continuing to pay this? And in your op-ed, I want to read some of this. With campus reform, you stated, quote, student loan cancellation is a slap in the face to people who have sacrificed for their families and out of a sense of personal responsibility when it comes to repaying debt. Kate, we know costs have gone up and continue to be for so many teens who just can't afford to go to college. They're 18 years old. They don't have the money. What are you hearing from other college students?
Well, at the Leadership Institute's campus reform, I speak to college students daily, and a lot of students don't know what loans they're taking on, and they haven't yet thought about how they're going to pay it off post-graduation. The Brookings Institute released a study that only 52% of college students even knew what loans they took out their freshman year of college. Biden's policies do not address the overall cost of higher education. It instead incentivizes students to not care about what loans they're taking out when they enter college and not care about paying them back once they graduate.
And I read that you made a really tough decision not to pursue your dream school in order to essentially limit your debt. Why do you think more students don't do that?
Well, I decided to sit down with my family, and I don't think a lot of students talk through the options they have and think about what the long-term effects are. My mother has a master's degree and graduated with debt, and my stepfather chose not to go to college and is a railroad engineer. Like you said, my dream school is $6,000 more, and Albion College, the other school, gave me great financial aid. I simply could not justify graduating college with another $24,000 in debt. Yet, looking at Biden's policies now, I don't know if I would have made the same smart financial decision, and that's the problem. Biden's policies don't address the cost of higher education and instead incentivize students to make poor financial decisions and not take on personal responsibility.
Yeah. Do you think there's a plan from the government that can help alleviate the debt burden moving forward? I mean, should that fall on the universities and not the federal government and not taxpayers that either paid off their loans or don't have any to begin with?
Well, Biden's plan, as I said, does not address the cost of higher education. It instead pushes it onto the taxpayers instead of the students. My stepfather graduated high school, enlisted in the Army, and is now a railroad engineer. And he is going to have to be paying the debts of students that decided that they wanted to go to college. It is fundamentally unfair that taxpayers that chose the personal responsibility not to attend college are now going to have to pay the debts of students who did.
Kate Herzl, we appreciate you joining us here this morning on the National Desk. Best of luck to you. I see a bright future coming to you.
Thank you so much.
One conservative viewpoint there. Now, our coverage of the student loan forgiveness plan continues with our fact-check team looking into the financial impact the plan could have on the U.S. government.
Student loan interest has been a large source of income for the U.S. government for years now. So we wanted to know how much money these loans really bring in. So I'm back with our fact check team tonight. So Janae, we start with you on this. How much does the government actually make off of these student loans?
So that was really hard to track down because the Department of Ed doesn't publish a clear number. But I did find this from Slate. The government collected $70.3 billion from borrowers in 2019. That was the last full year before loans were paused during the pandemic. Now that number only covers payments on loans that are managed by the government, which comes out to about $1.4 trillion.
And on that note, you found the government actually ultimately losing money here.
Right. So we found a July report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office that says student loans over the last quarter century are expected to cost the Department of Education close to $200 billion. Now, the report looked at the Department of Ed's budget estimates and data starting in 1997. The Education Department miscalculated that these loans would generate around $114 billion in income from 97 to 2021. But between the miscalculation and the pandemic, the program actually ended up costing $197 billion. Another thing the report points out is that the Department of Ed didn't account for the number of borrowers who are income-driven repayment plans. Now, these folks are paying smaller amounts, which obviously reduces the amount of money the Education Department receives.
And a big question that's been floating out there so far, Courtney, is how much Biden's plan will ultimately cost the government when we're talking about wiping out student loan debt.
Well, the White House said it'll cost the government $240 billion over the next 10 years. But other analysts have different predictions. For example, the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School predicts that Biden's debt cancellation alone will cost up to $510 billion over the next decade. And the overall cost could pass $1 trillion when factoring in things like new income-driven loan payments. Another report from the nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates a $500 billion cost. But we won't know for sure until the Education Department Department release its official prediction in the next couple of weeks.
Important context when you break down the dollars and cents on this cost. Courtney and Janae, thank you both for that. The Fact Check team will continue to follow developments on this and several other important issues. You can also read this story, links to where they found all of their information tonight on our website, thenationaldesk.com.
COVID boosters targeting the new Omicron subvariants are now available. The FDA and the CDC have approved this new Moderna and Pfizer shot. The Biden administration ordering 175 million doses. Some have expressed concerns about the updated boosters, though, because federal agencies only have data from animal testing. But FDA officials say it is safe. The government funding needed to buy and distribute COVID vaccines and therapeutics could be running out in January. That's according to a Health and Human Services official who said the lack of money makes shifting to commercialization necessary. Now, if you're traveling this Labor Day weekend, there's a new tool to help with flight cancellations and delays. The Department of Transportation now offering an online dashboard. Travelers can check and see what services or amenities they're owed per airline policy, things like free meals or hotel stays, for example. Just ahead, overcrowded school buses. Parents worried over students' commute as they start a new school year. Then, a missing woman found during a traffic stop, who a police officer is crediting for this discovery. The National Desk team of reporters bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in Maryland, where parents filed an appeal with the state after students were packed into overcrowded school buses.
The first week of Anne Arundel County's school year off to a bumpy start. Not only are more than 40 bus routes out of service due to a severe bus driver shortage, parents say the ones that are running are overflowing with kids. Amy Wookich, 15-year-old daughter, sending this video of her morning commute. Several students seen standing in the aisle and sitting on laps while the bus appears to be in motion. She reached out to her school's transportation specialist, who said they're aware of the issue and working to make adjustments, but added the bus's capacity, 69 students. So, quote, "We are not out of compliance with the law."
Are we talking about 69 elementary school children? Because there's clearly a different size.
At the root of the problem, Wookich says the sudden shift in school start times has sent the district scrambling.
The way the stops were spread out, they could pick up several routes, and there was time in between them. Now they're being forced, because there's not time, the routes are combined, and they're not able to pick up as many routes.
And one bus driver we spoke with agrees.
Transportation didn't want it. The school bus drivers didn't want it. Parents didn't want it.
Michelle Hahn-Thomas, who's been driving for the district for more than a decade, also saying SCA contractors were promised a 10% cost of living raise. That's not being paid.
A lot of people have quit. My best guess is at least 15.
And as the district continues telling students to pack their patience at the bus stop, parents now pushing back. more than a dozen filing this appeal with the state, asking for new start times to be delayed until all buses can arrive on time.
In Washington, a man now in custody after authorities say he attempted to kidnap a 10-year-old girl in broad daylight. Police say Nash Miller grabbed the girl off the sidewalk, then tried to put her in his trunk. A woman nearby heard screaming and rescued the girl, but the suspect drove away. Neighbors are still rocked by this incident. They say nothing like this has ever happened before in that area.
Rage, absolute rage. And this abduction is just one of many incidents of lawlessness in the city, and so I'm infuriated, and primarily because of the fear and concern it creates in our community.
Now, neighbors say an Amazon driver was able to memorize the suspect's license plate, and that helped police track him down. In South Carolina, a police officer found a missing woman after pulling her over during a traffic stop. Officer Constance Lake says she called for backup after discovering the woman didn't have an ID on her. After she ran the woman's name and vehicle, Officer Lake discovered the woman was 81-year-old Brenda Thomas, the same woman North Carolina police had issued a silver alert for after she vanished from her home.
I believe strongly in God, and I know that God had me in that block range for a reason, and he had me not pull that car over for a reason.
Now, officials say Thomas was taken back to her home by a loved one. And still to come, our team of correspondents breaking down this big week in Washington, from the turmoil inside the FBI to President Biden's criticism of so-called MAGA Republicans. Next.
Our Washington Bureau covers Capitol Hill in D.C. every day to report on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. For some perspective on what's happening in the nation's capital, I'm joined by two of our Bureau correspondents, Scott Thuman and Christine Frizzau. Christine, the FBI under fire from Republicans. What are their issues with the Bureau, and what's the follow-up been so far?
Yeah, and we should say that charges of bias against the FBI date back to the Trump administration, but really once again came to a head when the search happened at former President Trump's residence, Mar-a-Lago, and also with the resignation of a special agent this week. This is Special Agent Tim Tebow. He's been accused of bias because of some of his social media posts, which were read into the record at a congressional hearing a few weeks ago. He also is said by Republican lawmakers to have tried to cover up information in the Hunter Biden investigation. I should say these are charges that he has denied. We're going to learn a lot more, but it was very interesting. The day after he resigned, the DOJ actually came out with a new policy specifically saying that people who work for DOJ are not allowed to participate in any political activities.
Yeah, and also interesting reports this week that rank and file FBI agents not happy with the man at the top, Christopher Wray. Scott, from politics at the FBI to political rhetoric on the campaign trail, President Biden's been amping up his criticism of Republicans, which has been met with some backlash. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and a very specific section of Republicans, the president and the White House would point out. They say they're talking about the most fringe element of Trump loyalists, who they call so-called MAGA Republicans. President Biden, pretty tough, some fierce language throughout the week talking about them, specifically at one point referencing them as semi-fascist. And that's what set a lot of people off. They said that was out of bounds, that it was such divisive language, especially for a president who, during his inaugural address just a year and a half ago, promised to unite the country. That's something a lot of presidents do, but it's a very difficult task to actually accomplish. What's interesting about it is the White House has been asked about this, whether or not that's problematic to talk that way. They've doubled down from the lectern there in the White House press briefing room. But additionally, you're seeing that across the country, kind of this confusion over where the country lies. The president speaking about the battle for the soul of the nation, why democracy has to be upheld. And there's a new poll out from Quinnipiac University showing that 69% of people, not just Democrats or Republicans, but both parties in agreement that democracy is in danger right now. And so that's a staggering figure. No one's felt that way, at least polling wise, since right after the January 6th siege at the Capitol. And so the president has a lot of work to do with these speeches. He has to go out there and convince people that things are not as bleak, perhaps, as they seem. But it looks like that's going to be pretty difficult for him when you have both parties feeling the same way. And it's certainly going to play out in the midterm elections. The difficulty is that the message going forward? Is that what drives people to the polls? And which side, Republican or Democrat, benefits most from that message? Steve?
Yeah, the most interesting thing is both sides feel the same way, but for much different reasons. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about this as we move forward. Chief Political Correspondent Scott Thuman, National Correspondent Christine Frizzau, thank you both. Eugene, back to you.
All right, a big thanks to our Capitol Hill team. Expanding access to a life-saving device. Coming up, advocates pushing to bring defibrillators to more public spaces. The three main reasons they are not more widely available. A simple device used to save lives is missing from many places that need it the most. When a sudden cardiac arrest happens, AED machines can prevent tragedy, especially at schools where experts believe they're essential. But a Spotlight on America investigation reveals the devices aren't universally required. The National Desk's investigative correspondent Josie Sturman found advocates are now pushing to change that.
This was the last photo that we have of John.
It's an ordinary photograph, just a teenage boy passing time gazing at his phone. But Joanne Babbitt treasures it. It's the last look at the child she lost.
Do you think about what your hopes were for him, what kind of life you saw for him?
I always wonder about that. What would he look like today? What would he be doing?
What John Taylor Babbitt could have been is a question she'll never be able to answer. Because this 16-year-old athlete, a picture of health who hoped to play college baseball someday, was playing pickup basketball one Sunday morning when the unimaginable happened.
In a split second, your life changes forever. He was running down the court and he collapsed from a sudden cardiac arrest.
Sudden cardiac arrest is a life-threatening emergency that impacts hundreds of thousands of people of all ages each year. Their hearts just stop beating unexpectedly. They stop breathing and become unresponsive. Unlike a heart attack, there is no warning, and 9 out of 10 people don't survive, according to the Sudden Cardiac Arrest Foundation. But a simple device could save them.
Open the case, turn on the button, and listen to it.
Begin by removing all clothing from the patient's chest.
Automated external defibrillators, or AEDs, can double or even triple the odds of surviving sudden cardiac arrest. Yet we discovered these machines aren't available everywhere, including many high school games and events where experts agree they're essential, with sudden cardiac arrest the leading cause of death for young athletes. Spotlight on America combed through statutes compiled by the AED Law Center and found only 16 states and D.C. generally require these devices in schools. Just 7 of those states, plus West Virginia, specifically mention AEDs should be available near athletic fields or at sporting events. While in more than half the country, there's no formal requirement at all for schools. Some simply encourage AED availability.
You need to have those devices where the public can see them. There's no reason that we don't have them in all places of public assembly.
Experts tell us there are 3 main reasons they're not: cost, liability, and fear. With advancing technology, cost is becoming less of a problem. Good Samaritan laws we found in many states have handled the liability issue. But the fear of actually using an AED in a crisis remains a problem.
One cannot make a mistake and harm someone with an AED. The machine senses whether there is a heart rhythm or not.
Dr. Henry Jampel is a trained physician, but he says AEDs are so simple anyone can use them. His own sudden cardiac arrest 21 years ago made him an advocate for the device that was not available to help him.
You have the opportunity to save a life by yourself. Do it. Don't let it go by.
Joanne Babbitt feels the same way. There was no AED available to bring back the kind, active boy she loved. So she honors his legacy by pushing states and the federal government to one day get these devices in all public places.
I see progress. Is it enough? Absolutely not. But are we moving forward? Yes, we are. I do think we will get there.
I'm Josie Sturman for Spotlight on America.
Sudden cardiac arrest is the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S. To see a state-by-state comparison of AED laws, read our extended investigation online right now at spotlightinvestigates.com. That's it for us in this weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget you can watch us live weekdays 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern Time. You want to check your local listings. You can also watch online, catch up with all the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Eugene Ramirez. Have a great rest of your weekend.